Hello, everyone, and welcome to Rich Sports Talk. Thank you so much for joining us on the program today. Really excited to have you on. If you're just joining the channel, please hit that like and subscribe button so you don't miss any of our latest content. Breaking news out of the NFL. The Giants have traded Kadarius Toney to the Kansas City Chiefs. He leaves the Big Apple for the Red Kingdom. There is a lot to discuss about this. And if you want me to talk about this from the Chiefs side, I'll touch momentarily on that. If you're in the comments, let me know. And if you're joining us after the video, put your comments in the video so we can basically answer the questions next time. But the biggest thing I got from this trade is the Giants are changing the culture. And they are trying to do everything they can to move off from the stench that Dave Gettleman left behind. And we can talk at nauseum about the poor drafting of Dave Gettleman. We can talk at nauseum about how Dave Gettleman missed on key picks, how he didn't trade great picks like for the Saquon Barkley, didn't even answer the phone call. And granted, Barkley has been fantastic this year. I'm not debating that, but still a second round pick for a running back is incredibly high. And it was a bit of a stretch too, where in a draft like in 2021, that the Giants had great opportunity to basically make a move. They were on the clock, and it was a weird draft in 2021 where you had a bunch of quarterbacks, and the Giants had a big decision to make. Do they blow it up and get a new quarterback, or do they stand pat? Now, granted, at the time, it seemed like a decent trade, and it has landed them a pretty good tackle in Evan Neal. But I was looking at the Giants in that draft saying, if they're not going to get quarterback, be aggressive, try to go up and get Devontae Smith. Well, Devontae Smith was drafted the pick before with the Eagles. So the Giants are sitting there at 11. They have the opportunity to draft Justin Fields. They say no. They have the opportunity to trade back with Chicago. But man, history has not been kind to this pick because the very next pick was Micah Parsons, who might be one of the best defensive players we have seen in an incredibly long time. And the Toney pick has just become more frustrating as time has gone on when you see some of the receivers that have gone in this draft. And you see players in the draft that were selected shortly after Kadarius Toney who became, well, pretty good players. Like Najee Harris, pretty good player. There's a lot of good players that went in the second round. I mean, this was a pretty darn good NFL draft. And looking now, the Giants, of course, the terms of the trade, they get basically a compensatory third round pick. What does that mean? That means it will be at the very tail end of the third round, probably in the range of the 100. So it'd be about the 100th pick and also a sixth round pick. And if you look at the draft point value, it tells me that the Giants just wanted to get rid of Toney. And Toney has had a laundry list of issues. And there was something that I will go back on. I said on this channel when I reviewed the New York Giants draft, because if you're new to the channel, when we get to draft season, I do a lot of mock drafts. I do a lot of draft analysis. Like the draft is one of the biggest things we do on this channel. I love talking about the NFL draft. And I said at the time with the Giants draft, one pick was very telling. And that was the Wendell Robinson pick. Because at the time I said, look, this tells me that the Giants aren't exactly in love with Toney. And if they got the right offer, they might be looking to move off of him. Because don't forget, it's a coaching staff and regime that didn't draft him. And it's also a position where if you look at the pick, that was one pick I was critical of the Giants because I said, look, George Pickens is a really good player on the board right now. I thought there were better receivers on the board at that time that the Giants could have addressed. But they went out and they got Toney, who basically played the same position. Robinson, the same position as Toney. And Toney, look, it's been frustrating. 2 catches for 0 yards this year, constantly hurt. And what's even more frustrating for Giant fans was out with a hamstring injury, then out again when he hurt the other hamstring in practice. And I believe there was a stat. I don't know where exactly I saw it, but I think there was a stat out there that of all the weeks he's been in the NFL, I think there's been 2 or 3 where he hasn't been on the injury report. And this has been someone that's had a lot of baggage with the Giants, showing up to camp and not wearing shoes in practice, someone coming to practice not ready, someone that basically was griping on Twitter after the second game when he wasn't getting targets, and then having his coming out party, his 10 catch over 100-yard performance against the Cowboys. And all of a sudden you're saying to yourself, the Giants have a playmaker. And then he punches someone in the head and gets thrown out of this game. Look, from the Chiefs' standpoint, this is a win-win situation. If it doesn't work out, they gave up a late third-round pick and someone that probably wouldn't even make their roster at this point. They get a dynamic player who could maybe just use the change of scenery, and for all we know, could be basically a gadget player for them. Maybe even they use him 3 or 4 times a game on jet sweeps. They use him as a gadget player. I'm curious to see what they do. And if you're a Giant fan terrified of what Toney will do with the Chiefs, you can't think about it that way. Let's be honest. The Chiefs have one of the best offensive minds we've ever seen in football, with one of the most talented quarterbacks we've ever seen in football. And let me put it this way. If it doesn't work for Toney in Kansas City, it ain't going to work anywhere. And it wasn't going to work for this Giant team, because this Giant team at this point just needs reliable receivers. They need people that are going to be on the field right now. They already have an issue with Kenny Galladay and a contract that they can't move. Toney was an interesting player because despite all of his flaws, he's still a first-round pick. And we have seen in this league time and time again, first-round picks get opportunities. They get chances at redemption because when you're taken in the first round, it's clear you have talent. Does Kadarius Toney have an elite NFL talent? Absolutely. But I'm concerned about his injury history. I mean, this is someone that has only played 12 NFL games in his career and has only started 5. And has only caught 420 yards for 39 catches in his entire NFL career. As a Giant fan, it's frustration. It feels like this is addition by subtraction. And this is the other thing I will say about this. Because one thing really stood out to me. So Kadarius Toney was traded basically for a late compensation pick. He was the 20th pick in the draft. If you look at the point system, that's 850 points, right? So a compensation pick where we're thinking about is about 124 points. And a 6th-round pick is about 20. A high end is 25, but it's the Chiefs will be low. So it'll probably be about 15 points. So when you add it up, the Giants are losing almost 600 points worth of trade value here. Now, granted, the asset has been damaged because of the injuries and the lack of production, so you weren't going to get close to that. But I am curious, and I'd love to get your thoughts here in the chat, guys, because is there something else going on with Toney? And is there something maybe under the surface that is bubbling? Because let's be clear, too. One of the things I've loved about the Giants' change this year is they are not accepting nonsense. They are changing the culture. And it's clear that Toney doesn't fit their culture because they are shipping him out at such a low price. But are there concerns that the Giants have? Because they are basically giving him away for nothing. And this is also someone that, despite being the 20th pick and a guaranteed contract, really isn't making a ton of money. It isn't like Kenny Galladay. So when you have a receiver that you can also get the 5th-year option on, and especially with how much wide receivers are being paid in the NFL now, if you can draft a receiver and not pay him for 4 or 5 years, receivers is the new quarterback in the NFL. Like, you want to draft them, have their best years so you don't have to pay them. And the Giants are willing to move off of that right now. For me, that's a big red flag. For the Chiefs, there's no risk. But there's another thought I have about this Giant trade. And let me get to one of your comments right now. Again, guys, come to open. Not a good look for Toney. Giants need receivers. Like, Joe, you are absolutely 100% right. Like, that's the thing. The Giants cannot get receivers on the field right now. Their productive tight end just had a serious eye injury, and we're not sure when he's going to be back on the field. The Giants need, like, bodies. Like, I'm surprised they're not doing the invincible and having tryouts in the Meadowlands this weekend just to see if they can get bodies to play wide receiver. So that also tells you like how bad of a look this is for Toney. And granted, he probably went to the best place in the NFL if you were a wide receiver you can go. Patrick Mahomes and Andy Reid. And I'll say this, Toney, if you cannot make it work there, you're not going to make it work anywhere in the NFL. I thought he had other issues apart from the injury. Steven T, yes, we went over that. If you remember, even in his rookie year, he had the shoes that didn't fit correctly in training camp, so he was practicing barefoot, the injuries in training camp, then punching out the Cowboys defensive back in his best game, tweeting after the second game when he wasn't getting targets and receptions. And it's amazing because who would have thought, like some people were expecting a receiver to be traded out in New York. And if you were to put money on this, people probably would have said it had been the Jets. Now they've made it clear they're not trading Elijah Moore. Elijah Moore's back in practice, and it seems, at least for the time being, that has been resolved. I thought maybe Denzel Mims would be shipped out of town as part of a trade and maybe bring in an offensive lineman, but it is Toney that is the first one to get out of there. And this is like DeQuan Jerome says, this is a good trade for both sides. No risk for Kansas City. And Kansas City, they don't need him. They have a bunch of talented weapons on the offense already. They don't need him to be a number 1, 2. Hell, they don't even need to be a 3 receiver. Maybe he's a good punt return for them. Maybe they have 4 or 5 plays an entire game that they can scheme for him. But it's clear that this is someone that has incredible ability when he is healthy. But the question is, when is he healthy? And this is a concern I have for players in the NFL. If you know, I'm a big Jet fan. I love Mekhi Becton's talent. But I have been on the record the last year saying, look, I want the absolute best for Mekhi. He's an unbelievable kid. But you have to acknowledge that there are concerns with this many injuries early in his career. I even said this about Zach Wilson. Even if Zach plays great the rest of the season, there's still going to be a bit of concern that he's missed time his first 2 seasons. With Toney, this is someone that not only could get on the field, but it's almost comical how he couldn't get on the field. I mean, I've never heard of a player in practice who had a bummed hamstring, then hurt the other hamstring to miss games this year. And look, I think this is Brian Daboll's philosophy. He will make whatever pieces they have work, but you have to be bought in. And I don't know if Toney was completely bought in. I think this is a great trade. And this is also a key piece of this trade. What did the Giants get in return? A 3rd and a 6th. The Giants currently have a 1st, a 2nd, 2 3rds, and now they've added a 6th. So they have a couple picks now on day 4. They have 2 6s. The question now becomes, where they are sitting, do they get aggressive and add a receiver? Because is there someone that they could fit this culture? If the Broncos lose in London this week, which is certainly possible because it's basically a Jacksonville home game, could Jerry Jeudy be an attractive option? Someone that is a great route runner, someone that has been well respected, someone that has practiced incredibly hard. Could he be an option? And if you're the Giants, you might be willing to even give up a 2nd-round pick to get one of these good young receivers that could be available. Because think about what they have now done. You give up a 2nd-round pick, and you are expecting now to compete for a playoff spot. So your draft pick isn't going to be that high in the 2nd round. But the other thing that you have done now is by adding that additional 3rd, you make it very easy to trade back in. Because you can trade a 3rd and then a day 3 pick or maybe even 2 day 3 picks to get back up into the 2nd round. It's not that hard to do. So these draft picks that they've now accumulated, I don't think they're just going to sit there. I understand that the Giants are in cap hell and they still want to build through the draft and add pieces, but they're in a unique situation where the NFC and the state that it is, that they can go out there and add a key piece right now. And there is a lot of players out there that could add. If I was them, and and Jerry Jeudy is on the block in some capacity, I would do it. I would be really inclined to look into that option. Another option could be Brandon Cooks. Not the sexiest pick, but I would give up that 3rd round pick for Brandon Cooks. You know what he is? He's a reliable receiver. Is he an elite number one? No, but would he be a very good number one on this team? Someone that has experience, a good route runner, and someone that shows up every Sunday to play? Absolutely. I think he would be a nice fit. Now, I've seen Chase Claypool's name be mentioned a lot. I don't think the Steelers are going to move off from him. It's a question. I mean, the Steelers also have a couple young receivers. Could one of them become available? But look, Cooks is still a reliable receiver, however, 1,000 yards last year. And even though it would be a bit of a cap crunch to get him in, I'd still like to see what they could do. And even if it's not Jerry Jeudy, KJ Hamler, another young receiver that is out there for the Broncos. I know I've mentioned Denzel Mims. I don't think you're obviously going to give up that high of a pick to get him, but he's still potentially an option for the Giants. I think the Giants, I would be shocked if they don't add a wide receiver. I really would be shocked. I think that they're going to add a player. Offensive line, I'd like to see them add. I don't necessarily think they will just because of how good it is. But if I'm the Giants, I would seriously look at Cooks. I'd look at Jeudy. I'd look at Hamler. And the deadline's next Tuesday. There could be a couple teams that all of a sudden, if they lose another game, they are really going to be out of it through the first 8 weeks. So teams like you could look at for potentially is like we've talked about the Broncos. If the Raiders lose again, they'll be 2-5. Obviously, they're not giving up Devontae Adams, but maybe like a Hunter Renfrow. Browns are out of it. I don't think that they'd give up Cooper. The Steelers, of course, 2-5. But they're in a weird position because even though I've heard like maybe Claypool or one of these receivers for the Steelers, they also have a rookie quarterback. So I kind of feel like they might be wary because they're trying to develop Kenny Pickett and see what they have in Kenny Pickett. But we see that the Texans are out. Jaguars are a weird team too. They sold Brian Robinson this week. They have a couple of receivers like Marvin Jones Jr., a little bit older, but could he maybe be someone that the Giants target? You look right now in the NFC, Bears already selling players. They already sell Robert Quinn. I don't think they'd sell Darnell Mooney, but that could be a team. I mean, the Lions, Amon St. Brown, they're 1-5. He's banged up right now, but could they be a team you maybe target? I mean, they're 1-5. I mean, the Saints and the Panthers, look, the Panthers, if you want to get one of their receivers, I think you'd have to give up a premium. I'm not sure if the Giants are willing to do that. But there, I think, are some options. But look, if the Saints or Panthers lose, they're going to be 2-6. If the Lions lose again, they're going to be 1-6. If the Bears lose, they're going to be 3-5. There are teams out there that you could see giving up pieces. And I don't think the Commanders would give up one just because they're in the division. But the Broncos, the Broncos too are also desperate. Broncos don't have a first or second round pick. They only have 2/3. I think that they would love to try to get a second. Now, would a second be pretty high for Jerry Jeudy? Probably. Like if I was the Giants, what I would try to do is get like Jeudy and a 5th for the second. But because of this trade now for Toney, it allows you, like I was saying earlier, the ability to get back in the second round should you choose, because you have the 2 third-round picks to move up and get in there. So, but overall, I think this was a great trade from the Giants. I'd love to hear what you guys would like to say. The comments are always open. Your thoughts on this trade. Who do you think won this trade? Look, if Toney becomes a great player, I don't think Giant fans should be upset because, look, it wasn't going to work here. It just wasn't going to work here. It just was oil and vinegar ever since he got here. It just wasn't working. It just wasn't going to work long term. And look, I don't think he was going to fit in with Daboll. Daboll basically is all business. He doesn't want people to BS. And Toney's been kind of, I mean, he's been out there. And the fact that they were able to get, and I know this is basically trading him for 25 cents on the dollar, they still ended up getting a somewhat decent pick. But for me, I think it also tells you there's something more underneath. I think that there are issues, whether it's the coaching staff just doesn't trust him, because the Giants, they're this desperate for receivers. I think that they just know it's not going to work with Toney, and they've at least now put themselves in a position where I truly believe the Giants are going to make another trade. I really do, because even though the Giants are still in this rebuild mode, technically, even though the Giants still want to add pieces and still want to build this through the draft, they have an opportunity to make the playoffs this year. And making the playoffs is a big thing. So the Chiefs, of course, are on a bye. So Toney will debut November 6th at home with the Titans. I mean, if you look at this situation, I just have this feeling that the Giants are going to want to be aggressive, because if they make the playoffs this year and overexceed expectation, it buys Joe Shane, it buys Brian Dable more time as head coach and GM, and it gives them more of a honeymoon period, and it gives them a chance to figure out this situation. And here's the other thing: you want the Giants to become an attractive option, because New York and New Jersey is very difficult for free agents. The high taxes make it very difficult. You have to be able to sell. Like, New York, for the right athlete, is really a attractive place. But you also have to look at the situation too, where players want to come to a good team. And if the Giants make the playoffs, that makes it more attractive for free agents. It makes it attractive for agents to look at the Giants. So you want to make the playoffs and really help cement yourself and make this a long-term plan and show players, look, if you buy in, we could be a playoff team. And this is in spite of being in a division with Dallas and with the Eagles. The Eagles are the best team in the NFC right now. And I know Dallas has struggled, but let's also be honest. Dallas has probably one of the best defenses in the NFL, and now they have Dak Prescott back. You could make a case today that in the NFC, talent-wise, Dallas might be a top 3 team in the NFC. If the Giants could still make the playoffs in spite of that in their own division, that will be very impressive. But I will keep saying this. I don't think this is the end for the Giants. I just don't think that they are selling an asset like this just to sell. I think that there really is a plan here. I really do believe that there will be another trade made by this team. I really do believe that they are going to bring in another wide receiver. Now, it might not be a big-time receiver, Giant fans. I don't want to disappoint you if they bring in maybe someone for a day 3 pick or someone that I want you to be disappointed. I think that they'll be in the market for Jerry Jeudy. It might not happen. They might be in the market for KJ Hamler. It might not happen. It also depends on what the other teams want and what they're looking to get. And if the Giants can't reach an agreement, hey, they can't reach an agreement. But at the very least, this adds more draft picks to the pot, especially when you have a team in the cap situation that's going to open up next year. And just having these assets, even if it doesn't come to fruition this year, you have the assets to trade for pieces in the offseason. But I do really believe the Giants are going to look for a receiver. I really do. Maybe it's not the high-profile one, but I would be shocked, especially because you look at the depth right now at the wide receiver position. They need to add a piece. Maybe they'll surprise us and add a piece we're not expecting with these draft picks. But I really do like what the Giants did with this pick. I think the Chiefs, it's a good risk. If it doesn't work out with Toney, no one's going to bat an eye. And it looks worse on Toney, because at this point, if Toney can't make it work with arguably the most talented quarterback in the NFL and arguably the best offensive mind we've had in the NFL in a long time, it's not going to work anywhere in the NFL. And look, the Giants are establishing a culture. And sometimes when you are establishing a culture, it's more important to get rid of talent, but also get rid of people that don't buy into that culture. Because if you can get a locker room bought into culture and completely bought in, that is something really special. And it feels like Dable has done that already with this Giants team. Like, they fully believe in him. They fully trust him as a leader. And look, sometimes, like the Giants are showing, you don't necessarily need the most talented team in the NFL, but you need to be a complete team. And they're playing like a complete team. And is it really that much of a loss? Toney hasn't made an impact this season. Toney made an impact, I would argue, in 2 games in his entire Giants career, the Saints game last year and the Cowboys game. I really don't think they're missing much. This is just a frustrating pick in Giants history when you could have had potentially Micah Parsons. You could have had a quarterback selected in the draft. And it just goes to show how, if you don't have the right person in charge of personnel, it really impacts a roster. Because Dave Gettleman made a decision. I mean, God, he made multiple decisions that impact this team. And I kept going back to Joe Douglas and why I've been a big defender of him with the Jets. And I kept telling people like, oh, Joe Douglas is having way too much time. He's getting way too much. I'm like, do you realize the mess he had to clean up? Like, he still has the CJ Mosley contract on his book 3 years in. He still had, up until last year, the Trumaine Johnson contract on the Jets books because of the woeful decisions and the woeful drafting by Mike McCagnon. You look at how the position that Dave Gettleman put this franchise in, with not only passing on great players, but overvaluing others. But you go back to that 2021 draft. Yes, it landed Evan Neal, who could be a very good tackle for this team. But it's damning when you look at how good of a player Micah Parsons has become and the Giants didn't take him in that draft. It becomes a bit damning when the Giants weren't sure about their quarterback and didn't take a quarterback in that draft. And it becomes more damning when you see more talented wide receivers and more productive wide receivers coming in the draft after Toney with the 20th pick. I never liked the Toney pick. I was critical of the Giants. And the only reason I gave them some praise at the time was I said, look, they've at least now got 2 first-round picks. That tells me that they are loading up like the Eagles did this next draft. The Eagles got all those draft picks in case it didn't work out with Jalen Hurts this year. But guess what? It's working out with Jalen Hurts, so they're not going to get a quarterback. But I also remember saying this at the time, saying, if this was Gettleman's move where he never had drafted a quarterback and he was like in a second year with runway, I said, look, that's a move I can understand. But at the time, it didn't make sense to me. And it showed the disconnect that Gettleman had with the way the fan base felt about him and the pressure that was on him, because the Giants needed to turn it around because that was basically his last year. And the draft didn't match what he did in free agency. They spent a ton of money in free agency. They spent out the wazoo in free agency. Galladay, bad contracts, big contracts. And when they were doing that, when they came into that draft, I said, look, the draft has to match that. They have to be aggressive. If they feel Devontae Smith is the true number one that's going to help Daniel Jones go over the hump, go get him. If they think Micah Parsons is going to be a big defensive playmaker on this defense, go get him. If they feel one of these quarterbacks has a higher ceiling and is going to be a better prospect than Daniel Jones, they have to do that. But instead, it was a draft that, while it helped the Giants this year and this new regime by getting them that extra first-round pick, it was a draft that didn't match the team. And this is why I was always critical of Gettleman, because his moves were really weird. Like years where, like the Saquon draft was a move where you felt like Saquon was the missing piece and you were a competitive team, and it really wasn't that. Like, they didn't value the team correctly. And when they made that move, I said, look, I even said at the time, like, this is going to be a great move for the next GM, because the next GM is going to have 2 first-round picks. Because Gettleman's not going to be here to use that. I always laughed. I'm like, does Gettleman realize he's on the hot seat? Like, he might not have the opportunity to make these picks. And in hindsight, you look at what they missed out on. You look at the opportunity. They could have gone up and gotten Devontae Smith. They didn't pull the trigger, and they'll regret it. They had the opportunity with Micah Parsons on the board at 11. They decided to pass. And look, I understand Neal could be a very good tackle. He could be a solid tackle that solidifies the offensive line for 10 to 12 years, and that's great. But when you see what Parsons has done in Dallas, when you see the type of player he is, and when you see someone that I think it's a little bit overhyped, but I do see some people throwing the Lawrence Taylor name around them, but just being in that conversation, being that dominant of a defensive player, and the Giants had the opportunity to draft him, just makes the Toney pick even more painful. But the Giants, of course, are showing they're going in a new direction. I like what they're doing here. I like what they're doing with the culture. But overall, I'd love to hear what you guys have to say. If you're joining us after the live stream, make sure to comment below. If you want more content, make sure you hit that subscribe button so you don't miss anything here on Rich Sports Talk. I'll catch you guys later, where we'll have more Jets and Giants talk later this week coming up. Thanks so much for joining us here today on Rich Sports Talk. We'll see you next time.